space actually varies from place to place. For instance, there are some cinemas, such as, let us say, the Bengali cinema or the Odia cinema or the Assamese cinema. Cinemas like this are targeted at people who also, by and large, understand Hindi. So that therefore there is a large amount of overlap between regional cinemas and the cinema of Bombay. I do not like the word Bollywood, so I'd like to call it the cinema of Bombay. There is a great deal of overlap. So therefore, there is a danger, and it sometimes happens, that the Bombay cinema sort of overpowers the local cinema in places like this. Whereas in the South, where there is the understanding of Hindi is non-existent or is much less, the regional cinemas such as the Tamil cinema, the Telugu cinema, the Kannada cinema, the cinema in Malayalam has a greater chance to assert itself and to keep its native audience. So the space of the regional cinema varies from place to place, and it also, of course, depends on whether the product that the regional cinema, by and large, is putting out is distinctly different from the Bombay product. When it is, then obviously the cinema is stronger. When it tries to imitate the Bombay product, then the space, the negotiating space for the regional cinema gets constricted and gets weaker. So that, in briefly, is the situation. There used to be a time in the 70s as well as the 80s where the regional cinemas were aware of what was happening in other regions. To give you an example, people who were interested in cinema in Bengal knew what Adur Gopalakrishna and what Aramvidan and what John Abraham were doing in Kerala. People in Kerala and Madras, now Chennai, were aware of what Ray and Mrinal Sen and others were doing in Bengal. But for some reason, the regional cinemas have are becoming sort of watertight compartments, so that it's for example, sitting in Kolkata, it's much easier for me to see the latest Hollywood product or to see the latest Iranian cinema, but be completely ignorant of what is happening in Tamil Nadu or in Kerala, and vice versa. To give you an example, recently I was working in a Malayalam film with a young director, and we were talking. So some of the younger members of the group were telling me about what is happening now in Malayalam cinema, and I found I was completely ignorant. I knew nothing. Similarly, younger directors who are now making a name in Calcutta, I found that they knew nothing about it. It was almost as if it was cinema from Swaziland or the Belgian Congo or something like that. So, unfortunately, this sort of forming into little pockets is happening. There are various reasons for that. It will take far too long to go into these reasons, but the fact of the matter is that it's happening, and it's unfortunate. And I would say two things. One is that any cinema, or for that matter, any art, is inevitably influenced by the immediate socio-political, economic environment. So the cinema of the 60s and the 70s, which is the cinema that you are talking about, was influenced by what was happening around. Similarly, contemporary cinema is influenced by that as well. But the situation, the economic and therefore the socio-political situation after globalization and after liberalization has changed a great deal. So the nature of politics is not as clear-cut, not as black and white as it used to be. So therefore, that you can call it that confusion inevitably shows in the cinema as well, and it should. So therefore, I would not say that there is no political cinema now, in the sense that there is cinema which reflects the condition of contemporary society, and that to me is political cinema. It does not have to have political prescriptions in order to be political cinema. So that is one aspect. The other aspect which we often forget is that in the 60s and 70s, when political cinema was strong, cinema was the only audiovisual medium. So it was the only medium, the only audiovisual medium through which opinions, views, taking sides, ideologies, all of that was expressed. Now we live in a situation where there is a proliferation of media, television obviously, and the internet, social media, blogs and so on. And so I sometimes wonder whether cinema is now the most appropriate political forum, because other fora such as social media and blogs, they are more immediate. I mean, political concerns, movements, activism, it is much easier to disperse them, spread them through those media than through cinema. So therefore, in a lot of cases, these media have taken precedence as far as the political activism side of things is concerned. The filmmaker always had a responsibility to recoup the money for the producer or the financier. That was true then, that is true even now. What has happened now, of course, is particularly in Bombay, the scale of things has become huge, so that you hear about now the 100 crore club and the 200 crore club and things like that. So the compulsion, the pressure to recoup that money is intense. Now, there is a huge difference of scale, a huge difference of scale between the cinema of Bombay and some of the regional cinemas. For instance, I would say that the difference of scale between the cinema of Bombay and Bengali cinema is as much as 50-1. I mean, people in Bengal and Kerala still have to make films on a budget of 2 crores, 3 crores, which would probably be, the star's transport cost in a Bombay film. So the scale is hugely different. But even given that, producers in the regional cinemas, filmmakers in the regional cinemas also have a responsibility to bring the money back. It's not as if they don't have to. So the commercial side of things remains. It's just that the scale of operations is different. Now, this financial responsibility is in a way a good thing. In another way, it is, and I have no answers to that question, but in another way, it's not such a good thing, because as a result, one of the things that's happened, and I see this in Bengali cinema, for instance, which is the cinema I am most familiar with, is that a new filmmaker is no longer allowed to fail. Failure is a no-no. You cannot fail. You have to succeed. If you fail, if you try to do something that has not been done before, if it works, fine. But if you fail, that's the end of it. You will probably not be able to work again. That did not used to be so blatant earlier on. I mean, a filmmaker, on the basis of his intentions and on the basis of his past record, could fail in a box office sense on one or two occasions and still carry on with his work. Those opportunities have shrunk greatly now. There were three films by Ray in the late 60s, early 70s, and at the same time, there were three films by Mrinal, which came to be called later their city trilogies. And they were political films in their own ways. Now, Ray's politics, or the expression of his political views, was always milder, more indirect than Sen's. Sen's left-wing politics at that time had a much more direct expression. And at that time, I worked with both of them in their city films. Now, unfortunately, as we see, all around us, and these incidents have been happening again and again, is that there is a much greater kind of intolerance and insecurity now than there was in those times. Those times, looking back, were more liberal times. And we were talking about this just the other day. One or two of the films that Mrinal made at that time would probably have been banned now. I mean, either banned by the CBFC, which is to say the Film Certification Board, or by some crazy group, even after the CBFC had given the certificate. Because the dangerous thing that is happening now, which was not there at that time, is that the censor board now is no longer the last word. The censor board might give a certificate, but then either a state government or some fringe group might might well be instrumental in stopping the film. So, and that seems to be happening more and more, but that was not so then. So it was, in a sense, as far as socially conscious film cinema is concerned, it was, in a sense, a more liberal time. But coming back to the question you asked, which is what was it like working with politically conscious directors at that time and now, you know, that is a very difficult question to answer, because some directors are competent, know what they're doing, other directors don't. It's as simple as that. I mean, that has been so all the time. So what can you do? You try and choose your projects as carefully as you can, so that you have you're confident more or less of the director's capabilities, whether it's a director with a track record or whether it's a new director. And then every director has his or her own different way of directing. Personally, I enjoy those. I can't say, I have never said that one way of directing is better than the other. There are different ways, and I enjoy them. One of the things that has happened as a result of this whole intolerance, censorship bogey, is that consciously or unconsciously, many projects, both producers and directors, there's a kind of creeping self-censorship creeping in, by which people are being cautious and sometimes over-cautious, even before they begin making a film, of what they can say, can do, should do, and so on. So it is very difficult to blame anybody for this, but that is something which is happening. People are hedging their bets, being a little more careful. So in that sense, this criticism is true, that cinema is not as politically maybe outspoken as it used to be. But as I said, there are reasons for that. Within my sort of span, lots of things have happened, some good, some bad. Inevitably, that happens with any art form, whether it's literature, painting, music, whatever. But if you're asking me about one good, one bad, then I would say that one good, in very many ways, one good that has happened is that gradually a much greater degree of professionalism and responsibility has developed. Financial responsibility, financial accountability, the the sort of sucking out of illegitimate money from the filmmaking system. So that kind of responsibility on the part of the acting community. I mean, all of you must have heard stories, some of them true, some of them not true, of actors in the 50s and 60s, being physically out of shape, being indisciplined, coming to the sets late, drinking at night, all that. All that is a thing of the past. People, the acting community now, it is such a competitive space that everybody has to be extremely responsible, otherwise they're going to lose their jobs and they're going to be replaced. Nobody is irreplaceable now. So that applies also to the development of screenplays. So these are the good things in my view. These are the good things that have happened. One bad thing, but maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's my perception, because I have seen a different kind of cinema. Is something that worries me is the scale. the huge scale that has developed now. The 100 crore, 200 crore budgets, the millions of people. Millions is an exaggeration, but the very large number of people you need on the sets now. Earlier, when we worked, it was possible for 4 or 5 people to go out into the streets and do a shot. That is no longer possible. You need a whole army even to do a very simple thing. And particularly my experience, I don't mean to criticize anybody, but my experience when I worked in Hindi films has been that, you see 100 assistants roaming around and hurrying around as if they're the busiest people in the world. But nobody knows, or at least I don't know what they're doing. And sometimes I wonder whether they know what they're doing, because there are these hundreds running around. But whenever you ask them, so what is the next shot? What is my dialogue? What am I supposed to do? Inevitably, the answer is, all right, sir, I'll ask somebody else and come back to you. So, that kind, and it's happened in Bombay cinema, and there have been ripple effects in regional cinemas as well. So, this scale, this feeling of, of celebrityhood. Everybody is a celebrity. Everybody needs to be mollycoddled and looked after. These things sometimes I worry about, because I wonder whether if this sort of state of mind carries on, whether it will any longer be able to make meaningful films on reasonable kind of budgets, or whether cinema will become one huge, multi-million dollar kind of industry which needs multi-million dollar returns to survive, whether the space for simpler, more intimate, more personal cinema will get squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and finally disappear. That is a worry.